Hey, what's going on WBSC and Whiskey Network? Tonight, really pleased to have on with us Chris Morris from Woodford Reserve. Chris has been in the industry for quite some time. He's been put into the Bourbon Hall of Fame. In close circles, he's known as the mad scientist of whiskey. So I'd like to welcome you, Chris. Cheers.
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 Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Chad. Good to be with you all tonight. I'm looking forward to having a fun time.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So you started your journey back in 1976. Looking back from when you started to where you are today, is there anything that you would have done different? And is there anything you're especially proud of?
Oh, that's not a difficult question. That's something I hadn't been asked before. What I'm proud of, I can absolutely tell you that. But I don't think I'd do anything different. Now, at that time, when things were happening, I would have wish I had made a different choice. But it seems like provenance was with me because every choice I made turned out for the best. It taught me something. And I made some tough decisions that cost me positions, cost me jobs. But in the long run, it all paid off. So in hindsight, I wouldn't have changed anything. And that's the honest to goodness truth.
Right.
I've been very, very fortunate.
What do you think Lincoln Henderson would feel about what you're doing with today's stuff?
I'm sorry, what was that?
So how do you think Lincoln Henderson would feel about what you're doing over the last 15 years?
Well, right before Lincoln passed away, I went to a dinner at Holly Hill Inn in Woodford County, and it was an industry dinner. And we had some of the craft distillers there, and they had set up little tasting booths on the lawn of this beautiful old Victorian farmhouse. And Kyle, who I do know, one of Lincoln's grandsons, just said, "Chris, Grandpa said double oaked," and gave me the thumbs up. And so that's the last message I had from Lincoln, that he thought double oaked was thumbs up. So that was
always sitting on my bar.
Yeah, that was very, very wonderful to hear that. And so maybe my favorite is double oaked. I mean, you think about Master's Collection, Distillery Series, other products I've worked on, lots of things I'm very proud of. Proud of having Elizabeth McCall as our assistant master distiller, grooming a young lady for the future. But double oaked in terms of product, critical acclaim, commercial success, I think is the Tour de France. It's the big one.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Like I say, it sits on my bar on a regular, and I mean, drinking it straight or making an old fashioned with it.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely breathtaking. So you said something about the Master Collection. You've been at that for 15 years now. Do you still get like kind of nervous when you release one?
I really do, and people don't realize that when the Masters Collection was released, that was pretty much a nerve-wracking moment, because most people don't realize we released it a year earlier only in Kentucky, 4 grain, in 2005, and we had all of 1,000 bottles. And we were going to sell this unknown whiskey. It wasn't Woodford Reserve. It was from Woodford Reserve, but it wasn't Woodford Reserve. And we were going to sell it for an unbelievably high price of $69. Would anyone pay $69 for a bottle of bourbon? This is before all the crazy prices we see today. And boy, what a risk. I mean, we could have fallen flat on our faces and been extremely embarrassed.
Right.
And we put it out. Our distributor partner put it out. Monday, it went to retail. Now, it had been publicized. You know, there had been a press release, and this is coming. And by Tuesday afternoon, every bottle was sold. Wow. It was gone. and it became, of course, a cult, the original. And that's like, okay, that was pretty good. Brought it out again the second year, nationwide meaning larger distribution. And of course, off we went. But still, the Master's Collection, and I've said this many times publicly, is you might love it and you might not like it.
Right.
Because it's the exploration of flavor, formation. And it might have a flavor you don't like. I mean, we don't like everything. There's certain wines I don't want to drink. I just don't like that kind or that flavor. So again, we all have personal preferences. So you can't guarantee anyone you're going to like this bottle. So the risk is you might get some criticism. And who likes to be criticized? No one does.
Naturally.
I mean, criticism that leads to learning is one thing, but criticism of something you can never change again. You can't change chocolate malted rye because it's done, it's gone. And no one's criticized that, by the way. But yeah, it's always a bit nerve-wracking to see what people will think of your baby, of something you've created and that you think is good, because again, nothing in the Master's Collection is released unless I say it's good, it's approved, off it goes. So that's the only guarantee we can give you is, I liked it. Now, again, you might not agree with that. And there's a little second guarantee. You are tasting whiskey history. And if that turns you on, yes, to have something that's new to world. And don't forget that there might be another rye whiskey out there, another this or that, another that, but none of them have ever been triple distilled in pot stills. So again, we're always the first of our kind in one form or fashion. The first whiskey to go into a Chardonnay barrel, the first whiskey to ever go into a maple barrel, so they're historic whiskeys. And just to have a bit of history, to me, as a history buff, I think that's worth collecting, number one. But again, flavor profile, that's a crapshoot. It's up to your individual palate preference.
Right. So out of the Master Collection goes back 15 years. 2005. Out of all the releases, which one would have been your favorite?
Okay. My favorite is definitely not in terms of flavor profile, but it had a great flavor profile. But again, it was the whole atmosphere around it. And that was release number 2, the Chardonnay finish.
Okay.
Because you talk about the risk. Doing something that no one had ever done before, finishing in a varietal wine barrel. No one had ever put a bourbon. No one in the world of whiskey had put a whiskey in a Chardonnay barrel before. That was a big risk. And that is about the time the internet, the bloggers were starting to show up. And boy, we were taking the arrows and the stones. We were getting pillared. How dare they do this? How can they do this? And my sort of flippant answer was, because we can. And that's exactly what it was. We were taking a chance because we can do that. We're the whiskey, the Distillery of Innovation. That's in our charter that I wrote. We're the Distillery of Innovation. And now, of course, I can't tell you how many people come, oh, will you do the Chardonnay again? I wish I could find the Chardonnay. It's one of the most sought after expressions from the Master's Collection. So it tasted great. And then the whole story of working with Terry Adams, our winemaker at Sonoma-Cutrer, and traveling out to California, and he traveling here, and the whole story, we could spend a whole evening talking about that story. Right. So that's why it's so special to me, the whole atmosphere surrounding that Chardonnay finish.
So are you going to do it again?
No.
How many times have you been asked that?
Yeah.
So along with the traditional stuff and your Master Collection, you do distillery only releases, like your Bottle and Bond.
Yes.
Of course, you have your new one coming out, the 5 wood, which sounds really intriguing. I was reading the press release about it.
Now, in terms of flavor profile, the 5 wood, I've already told our team this is the best we've ever made. This, in terms of flavor, it's so complex and deep.
As far as these releases, distillery only releases, why not do it nationally And or is doing it as a distillery only kind of like a gauge to test the market, maybe?
Well, when you think about the complexity and difficulty of making the whiskeys in the Distillery series and the Masters collection, one hurdle that you have to overcome is scalability. How much can you make?
Right.
So we've had tremendous ideas and again, great product that we produce in small amounts to see if it'll work and if it will taste good. And a lot of them we've never been able to move into the Masters collection because we just can't scale them up because of the difficulty getting that grain or the wood. It's something that holds you back from a larger volume, albeit the Masters collection is small in terms of the overall scale of things. So the Masters collection is scalable. The Distillery series is the creative outlet, so we can get, you know what, we can't make 300 barrels of that, but we can make 12 barrels. We can do that. So the Distillery series is just a fun creative outlet for our flavor exploration. Now, again, you do learn, and you can take that learning and adjust for scalability, and it could lead to more products down the road. Just like the Masters collection, you're talking about seasoned oak finish was part of the creative process that ended up in double oaked. And the 100% malt ends up in the Kentucky straight malts. And the 100% rye leads to our current rye. And the original 4-wood that we're talking about, our new wheat whiskey, 4-grain, our new wheat whiskey is a 4-grain recipe.
No, I didn't know that.
The original 4-grain was bourbon. So it's corn dominant, but it has wheat added. First time we used wheat, malt, and rye. And this is wheat dominant, but it's still corn, malt, and rye in it. So it's a 4-grain recipe. So the Masters collection itself is an incubator for ideas and/or processes to be refined and changed to scale them up to the larger scale that the Distillers Select series demands.
Okay, great. Did you?
Yeah, we have a question from one of our members. What would you say to someone that wants to start a distillery?
That's a very good question. Do a lot of studying. I think you need to have a product rationale. You know, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it? I see a lot of small distillers, and this is not a criticism, it's an observation. They're just doing everything, trying everything. And I come up, of course, in a traditional company with a long heritage, and you do things because they flow in a template, they flow in a rationale, they flow according to a script that is written somewhere, and our script has been written by history and by our innovative charter. But again, you need to have a process in mind. And then you need to have some common standards. If you try so many different things, you can sort of lose track of what you're doing. So have the same proof presentation, have the same water source, obviously, have the same yeast strain, have this, have that you can use in common across your product line, and just make very subtle changes, because subtle process changes usually end up in very prominent flavor changes.
So we get this question a lot in our Facebook group, Whiskey, Bourbon, Scotch Enthusiast. How do you like to drink your whiskey? And is there a right and proper way?
Oh, yes, there is a right and proper way, the way you like it. Now, I'm not being silly about that, because it's true. I grew up in a household where my mother worked at the distillery and Dad worked at the distillery, and guess what they were drinking at dinner? Bourbon whiskey. And my mom, I had never heard of a Moscow Mule or a Woodford Reserve Thoroughbred. I don't know if it even existed, but Mom drank her bourbon and ginger ale. Dad preferred sours. I drink it neat on the rocks. You know, it's however you enjoy it is what's so important. And that's why we make Woodford Reserve. We make Woodford Reserve for people to enjoy and not to think about it, not to overcomplicate life, but just like the three of us here, you know, just have a glass of Woodford, have a conversation, be by yourself, relax, watching television or reading the newspaper. As long as you're enjoying that moment, that's what's important. So enjoy it the way you want to.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you any more about that. You know, Woodford, I think, finds is a very approachable whiskey. Your standard stuff well, my glass is now empty.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. The standard stuff is very approachable. The double oak, for somebody who's been drinking whiskey as long as I have, really, to me, it speaks volumes. I love the over oak. I think it's just a fantastic for which, like I say, you could drink it neat, you could mix it up, you could, whatever you want to do with it, but just drinking it the way you enjoy it, and preferably drinking it with friends.
Yes.
One of my little sayings is, you know, nothing like drinking a good bourbon, telling lies around a fire pit in the backyard.
That's perfect. Yes.
It's hands down, that's what whiskey's about. So my last question before we go through some pours with you is, if Oscar Pepper and James Crow were to walk into Woodford today, meet you at the gate, and you showed them around, what do you think they would think about the whiskey world and the whiskey you're making today compared to the stuff they did at your distillery so many years ago?
Yes, that's a neat question. I think, well, if they've been exposed to the world at some time capsule, then they can revisit the old Oscar Pepper Distillery, now Woodford Reserve. I think they would be shocked or comforted by how many of the processes in our production vessels look the same or we'll be familiar with them. Pot stills, cypress fermenters, the old stone walls. I think they would appreciate that. And I think Dr. Crow would love to see that we're still using hydrometers and thermometers to gauge proof, because he introduced those to the industry. And of course, they're not used very often anymore because of modern sensory equipment, but we're still using them. I think he would maybe tickled by that. And then sanitation. Of course, he again introduced many of the sanitation practices the industry uses today. And to see our dedication to cleanliness and our yeasting process and all the steps we go through to make the product the best it can be, he would really appreciate that. The souring process, of course, we're a sour mash distillery. Even our wheat and our malt whiskeys are sour mash. He's the one who perfected that process. Again, I think he'd be very, very keen on seeing how we've maybe improved or continue his processes. So that would be a fun experience, certainly would.
No, absolutely. I'd like to be there to see it. So my last question I have for you is, given everything that you do, and I mean, you're a busy man. I mean, you got your hands in so many different things. What do you do to recharge yourself, to kind of just kick back, relax, take a breather?
Oh, yes. Maybe I am very old fashioned, and I'm my spouse is a professional librarian, has been an academic librarian for 40 something years. We're big readers. I love to have a glass of Woodford Reserve in the evening, and I have that time carved out and read a book. Not watch television, nothing against television or anything like that, but to read a book. And that's
particular genres?
I'm sorry?
Any particular genre?
Oh, I'm more history, definitely more history. and biographies, of course, of historic individuals. But I'll go off with some of these historical novels that are fictionalized, but they're exciting and all that kind of stuff. But right now, I'm just reading a book I picked up, Shattered Sword: The New Look at the Battle of Midway, and it's about 800 pages. It's incredible. So again, that's what I'll do to relax.
That's a way to disconnect.
Yes, absolutely. I'm a no TV guy myself, so I find a lot of different ways to just chill out from a hard week. And of course, you know, a good pour of double oak, which I'd like to have a pour of with you right now. And you can walk me through. Bill, do you need some in your glass?
Okay.
All right.
We got a couple questions for you, Chris.
Yes, sir.
For followers. I guess the first one I'll ask is someone asked about double oaked.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's been an expression. Are you planning on doing that again?
Well, that is a member of, that's the anchor member, Bill, of the Distillery series. And it was intended to be a one-time only release. And it was just an overwhelmingly requested product. So we decided to bring it out every January. So it's the one product in the Distillery series that is on a continual rotation. So Double comes out every January. So this January will be the 4th release of Double. So it will be there every year, but of course in limited amounts.
Okay. So another question that's on the double oak is, will you distribute that in 1.75s, or will it always be in the smaller bottle?
Well, oh boy. Well, currently there's no plan beyond the liter 750 and the 375 replica bottles.
Okay.
I can't say no because I don't know what the future will bring. This expression is growing dramatically, thanks to everybody out there, and it has so far to go. And of course, it's a more expensive bottle of whiskey. So again, that's just something that will be decided in the future. But currently, we're still just so poorly distributed across the country, across the world, that we have a lot of work to do just getting it established with the current size mix.
Okay, 2 more questions. I'll ask you probably the shortest answer one first. The question was, have you ever toasted a wine barrel?
Well, we've never heat treated a finish barrel. So when we get a finishing barrel, now if you're talking a new barrel, that's another story. But if we get a wine barrel in that's held Chardonnay or Pinot Noir, and I've had Zinfandel and Cabs, et cetera, for testing, we're not going to put heat in that barrel because that would destroy the influence of the previous wine or spirit. So we're not going to retoast a cognac cask or a port wood or a sherry wood barrel. So no, we've never applied heat to a finishing barrel. Have we used French oak? Yeah, I think you'll see that sometime in the future.
Okay. And the last question is, what is the best experimental bourbon that's never made it to market? In other words, you didn't sell it in the gift shop or anything. You just didn't put it out, didn't like it.
I would have to say the best bourbon is not been tasted yet. It will come out. But we like to share every success with you all. So maybe the best is yet to come.
Okay, great.
We always look forward to the master collection and always new releases. So let's go on to double oak. This is your personal baby, is it not?
Yes.
Yes. Tell me about it. Tell me, like, what brought you to double oak? Once again, I absolutely love double oak. I love that strong oak presence in it. The nose is phenomenal. The taste is exceptional. It's great neat. It's great in a mix. So tell me where you're at from conception to your unique pours.
Yes. Well, we launched Woodford Reserve in 1996, and we're following the traditional brand development model of focusing on this new brand. Now, the world is changing so quickly now. Some of the old rules seem to no longer apply, but we were following, build the brand, get distribution, get people to sample it, be at the Whiskey Fest and the Whiskey Lives, and in those days, the big cigar smokes and things like that. Try people on this new bourbon. That was relatively expensive compared to the rest of the category at the time. And so slowly but surely we go from obscurity to now developing people who are telling us, I'm a Woodford Reserve drinker. That's my brand. And those same people were beginning to ask, I want something more from you all. Now, I don't mean the Distillery series, because I want something more available every day. There are special occasions when I want to show off, I want to buy a special gift, and I want something from you, Woodford Reserve. I can't go out to the store and pick up a bottle of seasoned oak or Maplewood finish because it's gone. What can I have that's available every day? And the answer I had was nothing. We don't have anything every day. So I was wrestling with that question or need, because I was thinking we have to develop something new, and it usually takes 8 to 10 years to develop something new, and we don't have 8 to 10 years based on this need, this demand I'm hearing. And I was literally taking an evening walk, and I had this inspiration. Let's finish Woodford Reserve in a second barrel. Take existing Woodford, it's already there, it's good, it's the finest bourbon in the world in our opinion. Let's finish it. Great, that'll cut development time down by years. And then let's put our master's collection learning to work, and also put our own cooperage. We make our own barrels. Why finish Woodford in a second barrel that's very common, a port barrel or a sherry barrel that anyone can do? And that's no criticism, because we've been using those in the 5 wood and the 4 wood. But let's do something different. Let's finish Woodford Reserve in a new barrel made specifically to finish Woodford Reserve in. No one's ever done that before. Make a finished barrel for the whiskey that's going to be finished in it. And that concept was seasoned oak, because seasoned oak was finished in new, heavily seasoned barrels. In other words, the wood had dried for 5 years. This would not be that, because again, you can't scale up 5-year inventory of wood. But let's play with the toasting and char levels of this second barrel. And that took about 2 years of experimentation of devising the double oaked barrel. And then, of course, perfecting the length of time the whiskey would finish in the second barrel. So again, that was another unique innovation that set us apart. The double oak barrel is unique, and it is toasted for 40 minutes, charred for 5 seconds. The Woodford barrel, the original barrel, is toasted for 10 minutes and charred for 25 seconds. So we've almost reversed the barrel character. Heavy toast, light char. Well, for the world of whiskey, heavy toast and a standard char. And we put the fully mature Woodford in the double oak barrel at between 95 and 98 proof, very low entry proof. A lot of water in the spirit, because it's what's going to extract sugar from the wood.
Right.
And we're in the second barrel for another year. It's a finish, and that second barrel is never used again. We sell it off. And I just did an analysis very recently. The amount of wood absorbed by a barrel of Woodford, how much wood is extracted, or wood components, is extracted in that barrel of whiskey? Almost 1 pound, 0.97 pounds. So that's dissolved wood. Double oaked, it doubles that. There's 2 pounds of wood in that whiskey. So it's not only doubling the barrel, but it's doubling the character of the whiskey. The color, look how dark it is. It's twice as dark. So again, it's very much living up to its name, double oaked.
Now, what's your favorite way to drink a double oaked?
Well, that's funny. I fully intended this to be enjoyed neat. Of course, it's 90.4 proof like our bourbon. I don't want people to go, it's so smooth and soft, it must be 80 proof, or it's dark, it must be 130 proof. No, it's the same proof as our bourbon. It is bourbon, of course. The only difference between the two, because it is Woodford Reserve, is the finishing process. So I intended this to be enjoyed neat, just like we are tonight, Chad. But I got the biggest shock when this was 7, 8 years ago. One of our salespeople from California was in town, and he brought a restaurant and boutique hotel group out, and they were coming out to Woodford Reserve the next day. It's going to be a big visit. And he said, would you all join us? Would you join us in Louisville for dinner? And like, oh man, that sounds great. You know, a really fancy restaurant and everything. And so I got there early. I wanted to beat traffic, and I got to the restaurant, and I was the only person at the bar. And this is a beautiful bar. And I'm sitting in a corner, and the bartender came up and said, what do you have, sir? I said, I have Woodford Reserve on the rocks. He said, well, wouldn't you want to see our drink specials? I said, no, thanks. I'll have Woodford Reserve on the rocks. Yes, sir. So I get my glass of Woodford on the rocks. And then our salesman walks in, and he sits in another angle on the bar, and evidently he sees the drink menu that I can't see. It's on a chalkboard. And the bartender came up and said, what do you have, sir? He said, I'll have the drink special. And I said, you SOB, that better be. And this beautiful mint julep comes out. And I asked the bartender, what is that? It's a double oaked mint julep. I said, you're kidding me. I'll take one of those as well. So we had very quickly made that leap from drink it like this, sort of the antithesis of what I'm saying, enjoy it the way you would like, to here it is in a mixed drink. Mint julep's a mixed drink, whichever way you want to cut it. You've added sugar and mint to it. Oh my gosh, it was good. And it was also $17, and that was expensive. But I see double oaked old fashions. You mentioned double oaked this, double oaked that. So again, I'm really glad to see it being appreciated as a great whiskey and not something you have to put on.
Old fashions, or I'm gonna have to try that mint julep, by the way. But when I tried it as a old fashioned, it just blew me away how prominent the flavor really stuck out through everything else.
I tell you, we had a live radio show from the Distillery about Derby time years ago. And they asked me just off the cuff, why don't you make us a cocktail on air? I'm like, okay, I'll just wing it. And winging it means you got to be very simple. And we have our Woodford Reserve bitters made for us by Bourbon Barrel Foods. And Bourbon Barrel Foods also makes a smoked bourbon sugar. They smoke sugar with burning Woodford Reserve bourbon staves, used staves. And it's just brown sugar. You talked about a campfire, fire pit. It smells like a campfire. It's glorious. So I use the smoked sugar, Woodford Reserve cherries, Woodford Reserve bitters, double oaked, on the spot made a double oaked smoked old fashioned. And still, to me, it's the best old fashioned I've ever had. Double oaked smoked old fashioned. It was incredible. It was like a s'more. It was like a s'more.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. What do we want to talk about next? Some of the master collection. Would you like to talk about the wheat or the distillery bottle and bond?
Well, the bottle and bond was just one of those fun things to do. You know, you look at what's going on in the marketplace, and there's been a lot of interest in bottle and bond, and that's exciting. And because our offering, with the exception of batch proof, is 90.4 proof, people are saying you'll never do a bottle and bond. So, well, why not? It's a distillery series. The distillery series is an exploration of doing something different. So that qualifies. Let's do a bottled and bond. And I thought it came out really nice. But again, it also shows or tells a story that Woodford Reserve is a batching of a little over 100 barrels from many different production dates, no less than 10 production dates. And there could be up to 2 years of age difference between the youngest and the oldest barrels normally going into the batch, because we're batching for a flavor profile.
Right.
Bottled and bond, you know, there's no 2-year gap between oldest and youngest. You have to be within a 6-month window. You have to be within the distilling season. So I knew that bottled and bond, not only was the proof slightly higher, but the flavor profile would be different because it's not our standard batching process. And again, that's just one of those fun things. Some people don't realize that, and they just, oh, it's bottled and bond, that's interesting. But it cannot taste like Woodford Reserve. And it's not Woodford Reserve, it's Woodford Reserve Distillery Series. So again, we try to draw that line between each of our product groups. It was we had 3 complaints with the original 4 grain. That 1,000 bottles, we had 3 complaints. And 3 out of 1,000, that's a pretty high complaint rate.
Pretty damn good.
2 were the cork had broken off. Okay, I can appreciate that. You're ticked off. But there was one flavor profile complaint, and I still laugh at this gentleman, not laughing at him, but he didn't like it because it didn't taste like Woodford Reserve. And you throw up your hands and say, well, it's not Woodford Reserve. It's Woodford Reserve Master's Collection 4 grain. It's different. He just didn't catch that subtlety. He just thought it would taste like Woodford Reserve. I always chuckle at that. So Master's Collection, as we talked earlier, are going to be different. Well, you want to talk about the wheat just as a change of pace?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Because this is our newest member of the family. This just came out a year ago, June 2019. And I don't know how widespread your club has been able to see or taste it, because it's been on allocation. It's not been nationwide, because we had approximately 10,000 cases of it, because we made this years and years ago. And the volume will grow over time, but again, there's not a lot of it. So if you see a bottle, grab it, because you might not see it for a while, but it's a permanent member of the family. And it's in our flask-shaped bottle, like our bourbon, our rye, and our malt. And that signifies one primary thing: a grain recipe change. And it's in the Distiller Select range. So those 4 products are differed only by grain recipe. It's the same water, the pepper spring that Elijah Pepper discovered in 1812. It's the Woodford Reserve strain of yeast, fermented for 5 to 7 days. The pot still influence, the maturation at 110 proof, and the unique Woodford Reserve barrel. So those are the common flavor formation processes across this range of whiskey, but the grain recipe's been changed. And of course, that goes back to 1935, when the federal government, coming out of Prohibition, approved 4 straight whiskey types in the United States: straight bourbon, straight rye, straight malt, straight wheat. Bourbon came back to life in Kentucky, rye came back to life on the East Coast, and it seems nobody made wheat or malt whiskey.
Okay.
And then a few years ago, one of our colleagues in Kentucky made a wheat whiskey, and now there's a few out there. And then we came out with our malt and now our wheat, and we're the first distillery in history to make the 4 straight whiskey types in the United States. So this is not a wheated bourbon. It is a wheat whiskey. It's 52% wheat. Our bourbon has no wheat in it. It's 20% corn. Our bourbon is 72% corn. It is 20% malted barley. Our bourbon is 10% malt. And it's 8% rye, and our bourbon is 18% rye. And of course, that grain ratio also is for double oaked. So it's a wheat whiskey, and it's corn, rye, malt, and wheat. Why the rye in a wheat whiskey? which is unusual when you look at the wheated bourbons, is because we still use a natural yeast culture. We still use cereal subculturing. Our yeast is never dried. It's always alive. And it, again, is our unique strain of yeast. And our yeast needs some of the nutrients supplied by rye to go about its life cycle. So all of our whiskeys will have some rye in them, unless it's 100% the malt, which we don't make anymore. But that was one of those exceptions, and it's difficult to do that. So that's why we have a little bit of rye in the wheat, and that gives it a little pinch of spice. But of course, it's a very fruity whiskey.
Yes.
And you wonder why wheat makes lots of esters. Wheat, when it ferments, creates fruit notes. That's why the wheat beers, the wit beers, are so fruity in the world of beer. Why? Because it's wheat fermenting. So by having 52% wheat, this is a very fruity whiskey. 90.4 proof, again.
It's definitely a fantastic pour. With this one, I love the flavor. I feel like it could use, for my personal taste, use a little bit a higher proof.
Mm.
I tend to feel like wheat whiskeys, when they get proof down too low, it kind of takes away. But that's just my personal preference.
Yeah. No, it's a very soft whiskey. It's a very soft whiskey. And again, it might not be for everyone's palate, but it certainly might be for those folks who are looking for a softer whiskey. So again, we are offering some options across the flavor spectrum. 90 proof again. It still has that little pinch of spice.
Definitely.
Nice sweet aromatics. You can certainly taste the grain character, and the wood is there. So it falls in our flavor wheel complexity. It's a complex whiskey, but again, the fruit. And when I say fruit, it's very floral too. I'm getting lots of rose petals and various floral notes on the palate now, which is just tremendous.
Oh, absolutely. I'm picking up, I mean, it has a ton going on. And like I say, I am a kind of barrel proof kind of guy. So I do like a higher proof whiskey.
Yes.
And like I say, with wheats, because they are delicate, always tend to feel like maybe 100 proof. That's just me. And I'm not knocking anything about it, because this is a wonderful, wonderful wheat whiskey. Not wheat bourbon, wheat whiskey.
All right, great. Well, let's satisfy your palate and open up the batch proof here.
Batch proof. Now, how do you like, just, this is something I talk to different people about. How do you like drinking your batch proof as far as glassware?
Well, these are whiskey glasses, and there's all sorts of different designs. I've seen Glencairn's, the Libby Bourbon Trail glass, which I helped design with Jimmy Russell and Freddie Noe and Jim Rutledge. You know, as long as it holds the whiskey, I'm fine with it. That's what counts. But,
yes, I do agree 100% with that.
But I really like, you know, a lot of these glasses are really for nosing and for appreciating the aroma, which of course is so much of the sensory and the tasting experience, our sense of smell. But sometimes they're not really conducive to drinking. And I have a couple, just some old-fashioned rocks glasses, and I mean they're old. I've got them from antique shops, and they just fit in my hand right, and they look smart, and you know, they're old, and they're easy to drink out of, and that's my everyday drinking glass, are those that are just easy to hold and drink, sip on. You know, you can't really sip on this. You really got to turn it up, and that's great for clinical and laboratory, but just drinking it could be a little bit difficult.
For me, when it comes to barrel proofs or batch proofs or really anything over 110 proof, I always go for a rocks glass, kind of like what you were just saying. I feel the air gives it more, because you got so much coming at you at one point.
Yes.
You know, so if you're going out of a nosing glass like a Glencairn or any type of glass like that, I just think it's just so much coming up at you. And I think with the more air volume in there, it really just kind of settles it a little bit. And well, I'm thirsty for this 123.2. We had our end of the year write up for the whiskey-network.net, and this was tied pretty much for what I thought was whiskey of the year.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful.
So I had a extreme difficult time because I loved them both equally, between the Woodford Batch Proof and Little Book Chapter 3, which I think is it was an exceptional blend.
Good.
There was so, I mean, I'm sitting there, I think I may even tossed a quarter up in the air. My God, this is just I got like 9 bottles at the house because
that's good.
that much. I'm like, I'm not going to run out of this in my lifetime.
Well, that's so kind. But people don't understand as we talk to folks about the batch proof is what it exactly is. It's not a barrel. It's not a single barrel. It's a batch. So it's just so, it's a simple concept. And I think the beauty's in its simplicity. And again, this goes back, Chad, to over the years, you know, people ask me, can we taste Woodford at batch proof or high proof, whatever the term they want to use? And I'm like, no, we don't have that. We don't have that. And of course, the market has changed. Now there's a great interest and demand in high proof whiskey.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, maybe it's time to do that. So again, to stay true to our roots, because every bottle of Woodford Reserve that's ever been offered has always been a batched product. And that's how we build consistency, that let's have a batch proof. And so as we're putting together that 100 or so barrels to make a standard bottling run of Distiller Select or to go into double oaked, we empty the barrels, and whatever those barrels are, because barrels, each one will have its own proof point. I was just tasting barrels today, 2 barrels filled on the same day on the same rick side by side. They had different proofs in them and they were entered at the same proof. It's just because of how the wood breathes and you know the story there. So as we put together the batch, each batch will have its own proof. And you can't adjust to the final bottling flavor profile of that high proof. You just can't do it. You go, okay, we're in the right direction. And then the next step is to add water and proof it almost down to bottle proof, the whole batch. And you're talking 6,000 gallons of whiskey. And now you taste it and go, yes, it meets the standard. It tastes like Woodford, or it needs a little more spice or more fruit or a little more sweet character, a little more, you know, it might need tweaking. So we'll get barrels that have those flavor predominant characteristics. Again, every barrel has its own character, and we'll adjust. Of course, the proof will go up a bit, and then we'll proof it. And so we tweak it at the end. So each of these batch proofs, the 3 we've had, are slightly different proof, just showing how the barrels have come together. And I've been asked, they taste different. Yes, they do, because they're pre-tweaking. And that's the fun of them. And again, I don't think we've articulated that very well. That's our fault. But yeah, get each one if you can, because they're going to be different.
Yeah, I really enjoy that. One of the other brands that I like a lot is E.H. Taylor, especially their barrel proof. And I'm finding the 3 different releases that you've had have been exceptionally different. I can't say better or worse than the first to the last, because they're so unique. And the last 2 releases are so minute, often proof, and they're just dynamite.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled when I heard that you guys are going to do it on a yearly basis. So have a lot of people out on the internet, just around the world, that get this, because I don't think this is just such a classic example of what I feel a bourbon whiskey is. This is just a stellar whiskey, and I'll tell you what, my glass is raised to you guys for doing such a fantastic job, creating all the different expressions, bringing new things, whether it's a distillery only release or to the person who's been drinking bourbon for a long time, the batch proof. It's just beautiful seeing such a pure example of a great bourbon.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I'm blown away by the batch proof. I'm mesmerized by one of your older releases, the seasoned oak, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Your wheat whiskey is stellar. The single malt, I'm still not a single malt guy, sorry.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I've been trying. But, and then, just what I consider a classic bourbon drinker's bourbon, the double oak. So, I mean, Chris, cheers to you, my friend.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I sincerely appreciate your time with WBSC. What's that, something?
We have it in our minds and are working with one of our local bars that
We're going to bring that up. But
we're going to come and visit you.
Oh, good.
we're working on getting a barrel of double oak, or I'm not certain what we decided we want to try to do. But I'd love for you to be on the barrel pick with us if it's any way possible. That'd be fantastic.
Okay, well, let's, of course, work on that. We're doing so much like this evening with you all virtually. We've started launching our personal selection program 2 weeks ago virtually. So samples can come out. I'll have the same samples you all will. Or it could be next year, we can be together. We'll just see how that goes. But nothing's impossible anymore.
Not anymore. It's a beautiful time of life to enjoy all the good technology, and so we can always stay connected one way or the other.
That's right. And I do hope that everybody in the club can come and visit Woodford Reserve at some point in time. Of course, the Kentucky Bourbon Trail is a wonderful experience, but to see.
We've personally been down there a few times, and
Yeah.
oh my God, you folk down there know how to welcome people.
We're all very proud to have people visit us, that's for sure.
All right. Thanks for being with us.
Chris,
Thank you.
really appreciate it. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.